Hi hobby friends, let's talk about light. I've mentioned this on the channel before, but for about 10 years or so I've worked in the lighting industry, particularly as a programmer for theme parks and that sort of thing, and also as a designer in theatre. Maybe it's a bias that I developed through doing that work, but I think light is probably the most important thing, well, ever. At least if you're a visual artist of any description. Whatever medium you're using, whether it's paints or photos or fabric or dancers or whatever, your real ultimate medium is always light, because that's what conveys the information to the viewer. But perhaps more important to mini painting is the light illusions we're trying to pull off. I'm talking about all that zenithal priming, lighting sketch, volumetric shading and OSL stuff, and in particular today we're looking at one of the ways of achieving what people like to call OSL, or Object Source Lighting. Now, confession time. When I started painting this mini, I didn't think he was going to be in a video, so I don't have the whole process of painting him filmed. But that's okay this time, because what I really want to talk about is the last few hours of the painting process on this mini. That's where almost all of the lighting effects happened. One part of the process that did come early on though was the chromatic lighting sketch. It looked something like this. What you're looking at here is 100% airbrush, starting with the black primer, then white highlighting added to that, and then filters of transparent inks. A lot of this was painted over with fairly opaque layers of paint, but I've said it before and I'll say it again, what you underpaint with does have an effect on your successive layers. That said, the main purpose of this process was more to give me a guide to refer to as I painted this guy. It lets me know whether I'm working on a shadowy part or a lit part, and with multiple light sources like we have on this model, which source I'm dealing with. This sketching part of the process for me feels the most akin to my theatrical lighting design work. I have an idea in my head, a scene if you like. In this case it's the War Master posing heroically in the depths of a moonlit alien night over the burning wastes of a loyalist garrison, and I have two main things to tell that story to the viewer: value, aka brightness, and hue, aka colour. If I were lighting this guy on stage, I'd be deciding where to place my lights, how bright I wanted them to be, and what colours to use in them. And the process with paint is almost exactly the same. If you're using an airbrush, it amounts to more or less holding the mini at the correct angle and spraying the colour you want to see. Okay, maybe there's a little more finesse than that, but more or less that's it. Paint particles out of an airbrush behave enough like beams of light for our purposes. When the sketch is done, I go back to painting the mini as I normally would, only really considering the interaction of the light and the model when it comes to highlight and shadow placement. One of the things that makes this method a little bit easier is we can more or less forget about the colour of the light at this point in the process. Now, all of this might seem like quite a lot, but I really think most of this stuff isn't all that unintuitive. As I've mentioned elsewhere, a big part of learning is just finding references and really looking at them. Go scour your favourite 40k codexes or ArtStation artists or Magic the Gathering card art and look at the lighting in those pictures. Imagine where it's coming from, not just that light is coming from the sun, but where that sun is in relation to the figure. And what is the colour of the light? And what other lights are there? What bounce light is there? That's light that is being reflected by the environment, like you can see in this very cool vampire pic I just found on ArtStation. There's only one source of light in this picture, but the bounce light from the red clothing is giving him a very wicked looking red underlight. There is so much fantastic art out there that can teach us almost everything we need to know about light. All we really need to do is engage with it. Hey, speaking of inspiring, take a look at this. This hot little orc was painted by community member Paul, and I've got to say, he's pretty nicely nailed some moody lighting effects here. All the more impressive given it was only painted with 4 paints total. This is one of a whole bunch of awesome minis people have been posting as part of the ongoing Limitless Minis Challenge that's running on social media and the GRG Miniatures Discord server. If you're interested in a hands-on and fun way to expand your knowledge of colour theory and painting, check the description below for all the info and a couple of videos exploring the subject. It seems like everyone so far is having a lot of fun with it, so do jump in and get involved. Okay, back to Horus now. After more or less finishing the paint job, he looked something like this. It's a fine enough look, but as a display piece, for my money, I'd say he's really missing a sense of drama. What we need to do now is get back to that theatrical lighting sketch I kicked this project off with. First step, reinstate some of those shadows using a mix of muted grey and carbon black inks. This muted grey has an interesting purplish tone that works really well with both my lighting colours, and the carbon black is in there just to desaturate it a little bit. Now, as I do this, I'm trying all the time to stay cognizant of those light sources, and with this particular pass, I'm looking for the bits that aren't caught by either the blue moonlight or the red fire. I find airbrushing shadows a little harder than airbrushing highlights generally, but there is one big difference between lighting and painting that we haven't touched on yet, and it sort of forces me into this shadow painting. With lights, the more colours you add, the closer to white you go. That's called additive mixing, and with paint, the more colours you add, whether through layering or mixing on the palette, the closer to black you move, and that's called subtractive mixing. So, as much as I'd like airbrush lighting to work exactly like lighting, unfortunately it doesn't. There are more subtle differences between additive and subtractive mixing that we should also try to get to grips with if we really want to push our painting to the next level, but as always, my rambling is threatening to push this video to feature-length levels, so let's save that for another time. Suffice it to say for now that if you're going for this sort of airbrushed global lighting effect, you may want to consider pushing all your values a bit higher than you want in the final product so that they settle down when you layer your lights and shadows over the top later. Alright, next up I need to filter in some Prussian blue to start building up that moonlight effect. Prussian blue is a great colour for shadows in daylight scenes and for midtones in night scenes. As I mentioned just now, subtractive mixing means if I layer on highlights over this blue, I will actually reduce the overall value, making it darker. So I'm focusing on just the outer edges of the scene here and areas of half shadow, all while keeping my general angle at the same back top left position I've been working with. You can do this either way around, of course, either starting with your lighter colour at the focal point and working outwards with darker colours, which you'll see me do in a sec with the oranges and yellows, or, as I'm doing here, starting on the dark outside and working in with lighter colours later. Here's that lighter moonlight colour now. I'm using Turquoise Deep. If you're going for bold and dramatic, you should explore bold colour choices. While turquoise might not be, quote, realistic, it will give us the right atmosphere, and that's what counts. One area where this method does a good job of approximating reality, and one of the biggest boons of working your lighting like this, is in the interaction of light and materials, specifically the colour of the materials. You can see how this turquoise filter really knocks the colour out of the red cloak, which is exactly what would happen if I lit red cloth with a turquoise coloured light. No red in the light spectrum hitting the object means no red to reflect back into our eyes. Okay, dramatic firelight next. This area retained the most information from that original lighting sketch, but I still need to extend it out and reinforce it a little bit. I made a quick pass with yellow, but decided my overall value was too low at the bottom here, so I grabbed some white ink and added a bit more brightness to the lowest areas, trying to keep it localized to the area under the eagle head. This is yet another really important consideration with lighting, the inverse square law. But don't worry, we're not going to get into maths and science now. The important information for us is that the intensity of light drops off really quickly from the source. If you're doing OSL and your source is the same color as the light it's creating, it's going to look off. Generally, it's a good idea to aim for white or close to white at the source and then build out from there with your colors. Now, my source for this fire isn't actually on the Mini, so with the white down, I went back in with yellow to tone it down just a little bit. After that, I added some red, since fire is, in a sense, a multicolored light source. I also blended the two with some fluorescent orange because fluoro paints always give a little something to lighting effects. In the areas where the firelight met the shadows, I also added a very subtle filter of magenta. I don't want straight magenta on here, it's too cool for firelight, but it will help enrich my red at the edges. Alright, we're getting close now, but we need to go back to the palette. This is another pitfall I see people falling into when getting started with OSL effects, especially if they're using an airbrush. The lighting here is well established, but it isn't dynamic. In reality, different materials will catch the light in different ways, but an airbrush will flatten out a lot of the details of a form. We need to bring that information back with some brushwork, mainly edge highlights and some stippling and the like, with some high-value versions of our lighting colors. Here's something else I do regularly, especially towards the end. Holding up your piece against a darker background is really going to help you see where your lighting is, as in the lighting illusion you've added. Okay, I've blabbered on enough. There is still so much to think about and explore with lighting. More on additive mixing, terminator lines, rim lighting, light and texture, absolutely loads. If you'd like to see some more focused explorations, let me know down below, but for now, let's take a look at how this guy turned out. There he is, Mr. Lupercal himself. If you've enjoyed the video, you can help other people find it by liking and commenting below, and make sure you hit the sub button to see more of my videos in the future. If you're interested in hanging out with me and a bunch of other cool folk, check the links in the description for an invite to the Discord server and some information about that Limitless Minis challenge. And if you want to help keep the paints flowing at Studio GRG, check the Patreon campaign as well. Enjoy the rest of the photos and check out my website if you want to see them at your own pace. Cheers for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.